and it was at evening. Father Woody was right over here as Sam was pounding on the organ. And you know Sam Backman, he can make this church really rock. And I was sitting there and I was just looking at that tree. And it was like, and then I was looking at the tip of that tree to the rose window up there. And all of a sudden I could just tell the tip of the tree was just starting to go like this. And it's like, oh, okay, just my eyesight or so like that. And it was going like this. And I motioned to Father, come this way. I didn't say anything, just come this way. I didn't want to disrupt in case I was seeing things wrong. And sure enough, Father Woody gets out of his chair, comes over about halfway, wanted to know if I was sick or something like that. And this tree just tipped right on over, right where Father was sitting. And so Father Woody always says, I saved his life by the tree. The only time ever in 21 years that a tree has ever tipped over, and we were here, and the next day there was Mass, that tree was already back up. Laverne and his crew had gotten up, Laverne was here when it tipped, and he had gotten up, and we continued with the lessons and carols. The next morning he had a crew here, and he put the tree right back up. And it was just, he said it was a double-trunked tree or something like that caused it to be a little bit unworthy, and he tries to avoid the double-trunked tree.
Did he design the tree stand, or is it a commercial tree stand?
It's not a commercial tree stand, it's wood, and I forget who made it or anything like that. Now, how many lights are on each of these two big trees? Each of them contains 2,000 lights. There's the C9 blue lights, and then there's the miniature white lights. And of course, they are pretty much the same lights that Laverne has been doing for 21 years. When he takes the trees down, he rolls the lights up onto a big spool, and he gets it exactly around and around so that they don't cross or get tangled or anything like that. He then stores them in the basement at his house and used for the next year.
Bill, he doesn't take the bulbs out of the strings, does he?
No, he does not take the bulbs out of the strings. They're wrapped right around a spool. And so then there's a crew that takes them down. Dan Fila has been involved with it for the longest time, and he's a young guy. So it's good to have a young person that is willing and able to continue this tradition. And we invite people at all times to come and visit this church. Down here, wow. Up there, super wow. It is absolutely gorgeous. And then Laverne goes ahead and he puts all the candles and the lights all around the base of all the windows. Richard Scraw goes ahead and does the decorations by the choir loft. And then it's beautiful, the greenery, but the red of the poinsettias also adds the beauty to the church. And that's through donations from families here. And Barb Nelson at Liberty Floral goes ahead and sets all the poinsettias up and waters those things about each and every day. So we always invite people, it's like even if you, from Eau Claire, La Crosse, just to come here and visit this church and the beauty of the church, especially at the Christmas season. And usually Christmas Eve Mass, it's usually standing room only. We get people from all over, families that come back. When we reopened the church in December of 2015, we had to bring chairs in from the downstairs in order to seat everybody and everything too. So this has been going, and I really wanted to talk, because Father keeps saying I'm going to talk about the restoration. Everyone's heard me talk about the restoration enough, because sometimes I get buses and tours here, and families here, and I get people that I give tours, and I can talk for 2 hours on the restoration of this church. I will talk a little bit about it though, but first of all, history of this church. This is a Polish church. Did anybody know that? Yes, it is Polish. This is a Polish church. Most of the immigrants that came here came in the 1860s, 1850s, and Catholic. They came from mostly Trempealeau, Poland, and Saints Peter and Paul Catholic Church in Trempealeau, Poland. My son has been there. Some of our neighbors and relatives have been there. And it looks similar to the church in Trempealeau, Poland, but obviously the one in Trempealeau is smaller. This one is more grand. But you go out to the cemetery, and the headstones that are here in Independence, the same name, spelled exactly the same, are in Trempealeau, Poland. You get, I don't know if Helgeson, but yes, but you get Shabillas, and you get Bouches, and you get Sensalas, and those are the same ones that are over in Poland that are here. So they came here in the 1860s, and they were mostly of the Catholic faith. So they started having their religious services in their homes. In 1875 is when they built their wooden church here, and 1875, 2025. We're going to have our 150th anniversary as a parish in a couple more years. So it's going to be a special, special time in 2025. And you can come back in 2025
You bet.
and do a lot of filming then too. So 1875, built a wooden church. Parish kept getting bigger and bigger, more people. So in 1895, they built this church. However, it stopped approximately right here. Okay? All of that was built. These two windows, no, but these stained glass windows were part of the original church here. So 1895, they built this lovely Gothic revival. Not the wealthiest of people at that time. They borrowed money against their farms and went ahead and built this magnificent building. I've been up in the attic, and if ever anybody wants to see some workmanship, go up into the attic. How the wood, the beams, the massive beams, and they didn't have all of the modern conveniences and the cranes to lift this all up. And just the workmanship up there, absolutely astounding. And so, 10 years, this church is not big enough for all the parishioners. So in 1905, they added on from right about here and added this, and they also added the transept windows. How much did it cost the first time that they built this church in 1895? About $20,000. The addition was an additional $26,000. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, but back then it was. And so one of the big things that they wanted to bring to our church here in Independence was the stained glass windows that they remembered from back home. So the signature item of our church, when you look at our church, is yes, the grandness of it, but also the stained glass windows. Now this church, there's 175 Catholic churches in the La Crosse diocese. Is this the biggest one in the diocese? Second. The biggest one is the cathedral. But of all the other Catholic churches in our diocese, this is the second largest. And about 2008, 2009, you couldn't sit in half of this church. There was yellow tape that was draped along those pews over on that side because there was plaster falling down from this church. It had not been taken care of, or maintenance was something that was lacking. And that was sad, 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 sad. So at that time, we had started a program, We Belong to Christ, and believe it or not, we were in debt. And so with that program, we got out of debt, and the first thing we wanted to do was a capital campaign in order to fix up our church. So we started a restoration committee. No, we started a painting committee, because all we needed to do was paint this church. That's all it needed. So Jim was on it. There were about 13 other people, myself included, and it was a good variety of a committee group. There were senior members of our community, Jim, Alvin Wojcik. There were younger people such as Dan Fila, and there were middle-aged people such as myself. And at the time, now I'm old. Now I'm old. And so we were a good group, and we got together and we hung together through 3 different priests: Father Robertson, Monsignor Kuntz, it was Father Kuntz at that time, and Father Woody. And now we have Father George. And so we got together and we were a painting committee, and we were going to go ahead and repaint the church, make the church handicap accessible, and to redo the parking lot. That's what we were going to do. We're going to be done in a year or two. Heck no. We found out, we got a group of painters up here and said, we want to paint the church, and they said, we'd love to paint the church, but we won't guarantee it for one moment because you have a big air circulation movement problem in this church. And so that was one of the reasons why the plaster was falling apart, falling down. We had a new roof, one of the new and improved roofs, put on in 1996, and unfortunately it was a new roof that sealed everything up really nice and tight. Well, this church wasn't built to be sealed up real nice and tight. It had to breathe. And so we had a lot of ice damming that was occurring once that new roof, and that's why the deterioration of the plaster started to occur very quickly. And Jim was one of the ones that was saying, it's like, yeah, there's something wrong. And we got Jarowski, and I think Jim at that time went up on the lift, and we took a look at all the areas of the roof and of the gutters and everything. All sorts of problems were up there. So instead of a painting committee, we became a restoration committee. To keep it short, what we've done is we've repainted this church. And that was sort of a controversy that we've only went through two items where we had to actually have a secret ballot within the committee as to what to proceed with. One was painting, because we had 3 different bids, and we had Conrad Schmidt, which was the Cadillac, we had Riley from Iowa, and then we had affiliated artists from New Berlin. We picked affiliated artists, and they were sort of the middle of the road. The only other one we had to go by ballot was the floor, and because once we started taking off the floor, we found that the original wood floor is underneath here, but it was covered up for purposes of maintenance, sound, and liability. And so we kept it covered up with carpet and everything too. So it was in 2015 when the church was closed from June until December. And it was where I had anticipated the church being closed for about 2 weeks before the painters could come in. And so because of us Polish people, we like to save money. And so we decided we're going to have a bunch of volunteers that are going to take all the pews out, all the statues out, all of everything, and empty it up for that the painters could come in here and set up their scaffolding. So the first night I anticipated we have 10, 15 people. We had 40-some people show up. And we went ahead, and I figured, no, we're going to carry all these pews out. Heck no. There's people smarter than me. They came with trucks, and with pickup trucks, and with ramps. And Ashley Furniture had donated 5 semis, and Ted Caboose backed one of them up here, and we took all the pews out and we put them into the semis so that they could be stored instead of going out to local farms and barns and being lost. They were all stayed right here in our parking lot. So we had 40 people come here, work their tail off for 3 hours. The next night we had 50 people. And instead of, okay, we got all the pews out, we got all the statues out, let's start taking all the carpeting up. And so we started taking all the carpeting up, and we took all the subfloor out, and we're taking it out to be into the dumpster and everything. The next night, Tuesday night, we had 40 more people. Cleaned it all. All the nails, everything like that. It was completely ready for the painters to come up, except they didn't come for another 10 days or so like that. And then we had volunteers with the scaffolding come and bring the scaffolding up, and then the painters went up and put the scaffolding up. And then Father Woody and I were assisting the painters by going up to the tip of the roof and touching. I've touched the very top, and it is very high, and here Father Woody is scared of heights, but he would go up on the scaffolding, and it was just an amazing thing to see the painters go ahead and paint this church. Back in the day, people would say, is like, when we started painting, don't change a thing about this church. This church has always been like this. We have photographic evidence from 1938, 58, 75, and today, that each time it was painted differently. Back in 38, we have pictures from Conrad Schmidt when they bid the project, and it was gaudy. I mean, you couldn't even hardly see the ceiling. There were so many stenciling, so many things on the ceiling. There were chandeliers, there were all sorts of things. But by 75, the church was rather bland. Matter of fact, the mural of Christ's Ascension here at one time had been just the middle panel, and it was Christ with the apostles at the base. And in 58 they just painted it over, and that was gone, completely gone. They just made it beige and sort of blah. But still, it was still a beautiful church, but it was blah. And so the committee said, let's bring back some of the ornateness of this church and of this building to make it back to the way it used to be, but not as gaudy and everything. And one of the big things we wanted to do is that as you entered the church, you looked forward and up. That was one of our goals, is like to always look forward and up. And that I think we do is when you come into the church. So what we did is we decided to go to 3 panels and have Christ in the middle, and then the apostles at the end. So what had happened is in 58 they had painted it over and covered it over, and we wanted to bring it back now in 2015 or so. And the painters, this still gives me goosebumps, is like when the painters came in and they said, Father Woody, Bill, come on up and I want to show you something. As they were scraping away and cleaning up the areas and the paint and everything, the apostles at the bottom, gone. But Christ's image from 58 was still there. The outline of Christ was still there. But the apostles were gone, and it was like, wow. There's still, it was really cool seeing that too. Also during the restoration is like the windows, every single one of these windows were taken out. Because in 100 years since they had been put up, it was our responsibility to go ahead and re-lead all of the windows, go ahead and clean them all up and get them all back to last another 100 years. So we had 5 different companies go ahead and bid on those projects. Lo and behold, this area of the country is really good at restoration of windows. So we had Vanderhoff Windows of Melrose, of all places, went ahead and did all of these windows. And the thing is too, is the beauty of the windows, you can see the lead right now at this time of the day. And what also has happened is that on the outside, the beauty of the windows is even better during the day, obviously not at night, because what had happened is the previous storm windows, or the Lexicon plastic, had clouded and discolored where you couldn't even see the windows from the outside until we went ahead and redid all of the storm windows on the outside. So the windows are absolutely gorgeous, and we started the project of the restoration by having people adopt the windows, and we had set a price, and so like that window was adopted for $65,000, this window for $18,000, $18,000, $18,000, and people adopted the windows, and that got us going as far as gaining money to get the whole project started. And we wouldn't do a window until that window was completely adopted, because one of our goals as a committee was not to have this church go into debt ever again. And so we did it as we could proceed. Obviously, one of the biggest controversy was adding handicap accessibility to the church, because people had said, it's like, well, my grandmother came up those stairs in the front of the church, why can't you kids come up in the front of the church? Well, what had happened over the years is that people had become unable to get up here. So instead of just losing that person, we would lose that family to our church. And I know several people that would say, I can't get up those steps, so the whole family went to Winona to church or went somewhere else to church, and we were losing parishioners. And also what happens is that people, sporting accidents, they wouldn't be able to get up into church. And to have it accessible to all to come to our church was something that we really wanted to do. And we came up with all sorts of plans and ideas. We had ramps on the outside of the church. How are you going to maintain ice and snow and ramps? That'd be foolish. We were almost committed to having an indoor lift come up in the middle of our church right there. You'd have to park out there, you'd have to walk or go down in the basement, go underneath, outside or inside, go all the way to the bathrooms, and then come up to here, and then you'd be able to come up into our church. It didn't sound logical. So lo and behold, this young lady entered our life, a relative of Ginny Kulig, who was on our committee, Adeline Puccini, 88 years young when I met her, and she said, I don't want no cattle ramp here. I'm going to donate for this church to be handicap accessible. We said, well, that would be lovely of you, Adeline. We're considering an indoor lift. She says, no. Considering a ramp. No. I'll build you an elevator addition, but it's got to be between the parking lot and the church, and it cannot be offensive to the windows, and it has to look like part of the church. And we're most proud of the fact that when you look at this church with the addition of that elevator addition, it looks like it was added right on to our church. It doesn't look like it's just patched up in there. And this is well used right now. She added 2 more stained glass windows, Polish of course, Pope John Paul II, I believe, and he's out there. And then Divine Mercy, which is Saint Faustina, is part of it, but it's Christ that's on there. So 2 more stained glass windows were added on. So in 2015, we reopened the church. We had the bishop up here, which was good to see the bishop up here at least once. And that's another story, but I won't get into that. And so we've continued to fine-tune our restoration. We redid the heating system in the church. We found all sorts of hidden graves over there, but that would take an hour to talk about. And we've addressed that to a certain extent. And then we were just about to go ahead and proceed with the downstairs. And Father Woody said, well, you can't piecemeal that. You got to go ahead and come up with a plan. And then COVID hit. And so we took a couple of years off. And Father George has come up and he has said, guys, I want this church finished by the time we celebrate our 150th anniversary in 2025. So right now we've come up with a plan as far as restoring the downstairs, because if you've all been downstairs, there's lots of shag carpeting down there. There's all sorts of wood paneling. There's drop ceilings. There's kitchen appliances that says do not use because people donated them when they were getting new ones 20-some years ago. And security risks down there. People can go down there and turn on the stoves and leave. There's all sorts of issues that are going on downstairs. So we hope to proceed with that. The best thing I can tell you is that this church is, people value it, and we feel confident that we will finish the church by 2025. And the best thing is that we're not in debt at all. And I'll tell you, what you see in this church, if we would have started with an architect's plan and vision before we started, we would have never done this. So going back to when we started, when we went and toured churches, 5 churches, and one of the things that we learned, 2 things we learned, is do not hire an architect. It will scare people so that they won't get going on this, and hire local. People that are local will value this church. So if we would have hired an architect and said, we want to do this, we want to redo the lighting, we want to do the carpeting, we want to do the pews, we want to do the painting, the brickwork, sanctuary, would have said it'll cost you $3 million. Do you think we would have ever gotten started? No way. It's cost us $3 million, and we've paid for every penny of it, and have not gone into debt at all. So it is a beautiful building. It is a church that will hopefully continue on for many, many years, and especially the beauty of this Christmas season when you see these trees and just come in here just to sit and pray. It is absolutely a joy. I thank you. I talked longer than I thought I would.
Well, when you were doing the restoration of the painting and you took all the pews out, did you have service here?
So what happened is that we had volunteers. It was Margie and Dwayne Poppy and their families. And what they would do is they would take a section of pews, take it over into the rectory's garage, or father's garage, and they would strip all the pews, and they would go ahead, and so it was like, no, you couldn't sit back in that section, because those pews were all done by local people.
During Mass, because you said you took all the pews.
Oh, when the pews are out. Yes. We had Mass at our usual location, the school. The school gym. The school gym. So when all the pews, when the church was closed from the end of June until December 5th, we had Mass over at the school.
But you actually had volunteers who actually stripped all of these?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Yep. And they did it in sections. They did it over 3 summers. 3 summers. And now there used to be more pews in this church. Because when before the restoration, like these are 36 inches apart. Before the restoration, they were 30 inches apart. So we used to sit really close to each other, and we would be kissing each other's neck all during Mass. So,
Well, people have gotten a little bigger too.
yeah, people have gotten a little bit bigger and everything like that. So it just makes it easier to get in and out. And it is a shame is that this church is only full for 2 Masses, Christmas Eve and Easter. And some funerals, unfortunately, and some weddings, lovely. But it's back in the day, this church was full at all times. Laverne even says when he first started coming here for Easter services, Good Friday services, you couldn't find a seat in here.
Even the balcony.
Even the balcony was full, and so we didn't feel a need to have as many pews. Right now, you can easily seat like 650 in here. And it's a shame that it's usually about 200, 230 that we have at Mass.
Can I just add a little?
Go ahead, Pauline.
With the stained glass, I think that they should know that every single piece of glass was taken out.
Correct.
Every single piece of glass was washed and reletted.
So,
Yeah, and that the experts were right here in Trempealeau County.
correct. Yeah.
So like how old is that? How old is that big stained glass window?
Okay, so these windows, these little windows, 1895.
Okay.
And they were built or designed in Chicago and then transported up here. The original windows, not the transept windows,
Okay.
total, and I've heard this from several people, $700 total, all the windows. These transept windows were built or were from the same company in 1905. I have no idea how much those two cost.
Okay.
To replace these stained glass windows nowadays would cost millions.
Yeah.
Millions. So, yes, and another thing too is you can see if you walk along the base of these windows, you'll see some Polish inscriptions, and that's the families that donated the original windows in Polish. So, what a number of things is like when we were doing the restoration, because we were redoing the windows, should we have the names of the people that went ahead and adopted the windows? We just didn't want to busy up the church at all. We are planning for our 150th anniversary, we will have all the names in a book as to who donated, adopted the windows, who adopted the pendants, who donated to the church restoration. But it is one of the things too, is like, okay, we finished painting this church in 2015. It had been painted, or it had been built in 1895, 1905, so it was painted then in 1938, then in 58, then in 75. And then it should have been painted in the 90s, but it never was. And so it wasn't until 2015 when we needed to redo the whole thing. But usually it's been painted every 20 to 25 years. So 2015 and 2035, 2040, I won't be here, but you guys will be in charge of the painting. You guys will be then, okay? That's what I plan on and everything too. So, but
Did anyone, before you leave, did any of you guys have any questions? You did beforehand, and it's okay.
yep, you can talk about it all the time. So it is something that people value in this church, is like even the tile here it's an Italian, it's not marble, but it's an Italian ceramic that was donated by a family, by a Scraw family here in town. And so the woodwork that you see on the altars, it's what's left of the original communion railing that used to exist here. This used to be the communion railing, and that was taken out in 1960, 1962. And the priest was going to get rid of it at that time, and the parishioners took it out and hid it in a barn for many decades, Marsalic barn. Unfortunately, they didn't properly store it properly, so it mostly rotted. And then our local woodworkers, the Backman family, and Dan Backman and his uncle, I believe, went ahead and restored what was left. So you imagine what the communion railing looked like here, all the beauty and the intricate work that was done here. Now, you know, at one time in the 60s, 62, and we still have the drawings of the plans to make this a church in the round, where the altar would have been in the middle, and we would have destroyed all of these altars. That always, we still got it. We still got it. That's what they wanted to do, and that was the 60s, and that's what they wanted to do, is make this a church in the round. And I got the plans. All right, I got it over in the rectory.
The church, I think they should know, the church was completely filled with scaffolding.
Yes.
From one end to the other, to the top. And the Stations of the Cross are very, very heavy. They were on picnic or tables in the basement, and we people that didn't know a lot about this were so concerned that the scaffolding would fall down. And ruin our stations, because they were on tables in the basement.
But yes, as Pauline says, it was scaffolding from one end of the church. You could climb up and go from every little corner in this church.
The painters were using a color, sometimes they wanted to be able to.
Yep.
But the weight of the scaffolding was just unreal.
Yes. Now, another thing, if you look back in the choir, that window that you see back there, before the restoration, and it's the third largest window in our church, was not visible from the inside of this church. So what had happened is back in 1918, they got a beautiful organ with all sorts of organ pipes, and what they did is they covered up that arch so that that window was not seen, and the organ was back there, and obviously the organ hadn't been working in a long time. It's been electric organs. And so the restoration committee had told Father Woody, and it was Laverne's idea too, is like, well, let's reopen up that arch. That arch had always been there. And the choir was always sort of drabby and dark. And then once that is opened up, it is lit up beautifully up there. But the third largest window was not visible in this parish from like 1918 until 2015. So that just gives more light to that church. So what we did with the restoration, when parishioners were saying don't change a thing, we changed a number of things. By opening up that window, by adding on the elevator addition. So change is inevitable, but hopefully what we did is we changed it to the good. Now, one other little story, keep me talking, is this is Saints Peter and Paul, which is swords and keys. Okay? So, Saints Peter has the keys, and St. Paul has the swords. As you enter the church property now, there's a wrought iron fence that was put up there because they redid the road, and so we needed a wall up there, and so we went ahead and we put up a fence. The state just wanted to go ahead and put up a routine old fence, so we had to dicker with the DOT and say, can we put up our own fence? And you know how the government works, hate to say that, but it does, it doesn't, is that we had to go ahead and fight with the DOT in order to get the okay that we wanted to put up our own fence, because this is a religious and historical property. So Ken Halama, one of our parishioners who does a lot of metal work, went ahead and put up a wrought iron fence, or built a wrought iron fence. We had a bunch of volunteers put it up. And in that fence, there are keys and swords. Then as you enter the church, on the northwest window, there's a stained glass window in that doorway, and on the southwest there's a stained glass window in that doorway. Keys and swords. Keys and swords. Then Father Woody said, well, shouldn't we keep incorporating it all through the nave? Swords are in the stenciling right there, and they're down below. And then you look up there, as you reach up high, the keys are in the stenciling. So that's one of those little things, is like the keys and the swords as you enter the church property, as you enter the building, as you walk through the nave, all the way to Saints Peter and Paul, keys and swords. So guess what our capital campaign was called when we went ahead and did our restoration? The Keys and Swords Capital Campaign. Of course, the painting was another, because Father Woody was big into red. He wanted vibrant red. And so we came up with that red. I don't know if you call it a red, but it is like the painters didn't really want it was hard to make it work with a real vibrant blood red. So Father Woody was content with that type of red. But it is a Polish tradition to have a red in our church. And it was one of the things too, as we talked with affiliated artists, and we said we do not want this to be a copycat of churches that you've done. Because Linda and I had gone to a funeral in Green Bay where affiliated artists had recently done a church. And their first adaptation, or their first thing that they were going to do to our church, is like, oh, that's similar to the one in Green Bay. And we wanted it different. And that's why we did incorporate the stenciling with the keys and the swords. It's a different type of red, and it's a different type of a gold. Now, anything that's gold in the sanctuary is actually gold. It's gold leaf. Anything outside the sanctuary is just the paint of gold. But anything in here is gold leaf. So it's like, this is actual gold right in there. Gold leaf, I should say. So, yeah.
All these crowns on
Mary, those are jewels. So that's another thing too, is like the church in Trempealeau, Poland has the exact same painting or description of Mary with the infant, with the angels looking. And so that's the exact same thing that was in Trempealeau, Poland. And so we did have that removed, and we did have that restored down at Affiliate Artists in New Berlin. And then we had the emeralds go ahead, and they're same emeralds or the same jewels. They were just polished up.
Are they priceless emeralds or are they?
Nah, I don't think they're priceless emeralds. No, no, no. They could be, but I've never.
I would bet they're Swarovski is what I would bet.
You would think. You would think.
Or the precursor of whatever.
So, any questions? It's New Year. We're going home to make a meatloaf, so we could stay here all night. So, yes. Well, and the thing is too is I thank the whole committee, and it's like we're still a committee, we're still gathering. We've now added new members to the committee that are, because our downstairs has a big kitchen motif, and so we have Charlotte, we have Jane Matchy, we have Mary Dano, we have Kay Wozny, and so we have a number of people. I'm just the person that's been chairperson, and I sort of just get the committees going, and everybody else does all the work. So that's what we do. But
Did you talk about the nativity scene over there?
the nativity scene is something that has been here since Linda and I have been coming to the church for 40 years. So what I started off with is that the nativity scene has always been a part of this church that I can remember, Pauline. Yeah. But what I started off with is we had the lovely nativity scene, and then we had 6 or 8 artificial trees that stood about yay tall, and that's what we did as far as decorations for our Christmas season. And so it was like Linda and I have been here for 40 years, and 21 years ago when Father Robertson asked Laverne, to the grandness of this building, we need to have a grand tree decoration to really commemorate Christ's birth. And so Laverne has done this for 21 years. The nativity scene at Christmas Eve, we have one of the young people bring in baby Jesus, and then the manger is blessed, and then one of our little kid, 6 or 7 year old, come in and brings baby Jesus and sets baby Jesus in the manger, and baby Jesus is there.
I think she remembers the poppies being involved in
Painting the statues. That would be Margie and Dwayne.
How old do you think that is then?
Pauline, Charlotte, that's before me.
Isn't there a Polish name for it, a Stajenka or something? No, it's with an S.
That I don't know.
Because Vitus Krampa was talking about. It was called a...
And I think that was the structure was made on someone's farm.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's before
We
me.
have some
That's
things
always
on there
been here
about
before
that.
me, so I don't know the history of that.
Yeah, we'll need to look at the history.
Yes. Any other questions? I love that I had a little bit of an audience. Christmas Eve, everyone left because they wanted to open gifts, so I didn't have an audience. The week before that, Laverne had 20 or so people, and then I'm going to be giving this again next week, just because the trees will still be up, because they're having the Christmas program of the school for the first time in the church next Friday. They've always done it at the school, but they've never been able to take part with the trees, so they're having it next Friday here. Yeah.
How did they find the bricks to match the church?
Jarowski's found them, and they found them, and it's like that was one of our, because the elevator addition was supposed to have been done the same time that the church was closed for the painting, but because of the legalities as far as removing some graves on that side, we had to postpone that. So the elevator addition was actually done during the winter months, and so they covered it all up in like a tarp and an enclosure so that they could keep it warm and keep on working. So it was God's, and Ben Silla, who was pretty much the contact person with Jarowski's, and Greg Jarowski since passed, was quite involved. He was a parishioner of this church. And so that's why hiring local is like they knew myself, they knew Jim. It's like, we don't want it to look like it's an addition. You've got to find brick that matches that church. And so here it is, they're doing the brick and it's all covered up. And it wasn't until April when they removed the covering and everyone says, well, that's always been there. So where Jarowski's found that brick, and that's where I'll go back, hiring local, is like they care about this church. They care that they know they're only in Whitehall and they live here and they come to church here. That if people said, well, that's white or green and gold brick or something like that, and it doesn't look like it belongs to the church. But, and I'm most proud of it, I hope Jim was too, is that addition looks like it was part of that church. Yeah, that it was part of the church.
beautiful church.
Oh, it is. It's just amazing.
No getting around it.
Oh, here you get a picture in the parking lot too from
Okay.